Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, standing firm, President Biden sticking to the end of the month deadline to withdraw from Afghanistan, despite pleas from G7 leaders to allow for more time.
The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops.
The increased efforts now to get thousands of Americans and allies out and away from Taliban rule. Getting a boost. Two breaking stories this morning in the fight against COVID-19. First, Johnson & Johnson announcing new data supporting a second dose of its single-shot vaccine. Plus, details about a classified report that the Washington Post says was received by the president and what it reportedly found about the origins of COVID-19. A House divided. Democrats narrowly pass a $3.5 trillion budget plan, clearing the way for President Biden's ambitious agenda. The program's getting a big boost after Democratic holdouts threatened to block the way. And remembering a legend, tributes pouring in for Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts, who passed away yesterday at 80. A look back at the life of the man being called one of the greatest drummers of his generation. That is going to be a great tribute from one of our colleagues.
Yes, absolutely. And it'll a lot of great tributes pouring in.
Yeah, absolutely. So. But Carson Daly, of course, somebody who commemorates these people so well.
Yes, because he knows them all.
So. Exactly.
We're going to start with breaking news this morning, though, in the fight against COVID-19. Johnson & Johnson published promising new data for its booster shot. The company says it conducted studies on patients who had received the single-shot vaccine 6 to 8 months ago. It found that the booster shot produced a strong immune response after just one dose. This comes after Pfizer received official approval for a third booster shot. Meanwhile, the Biden administration reportedly received a classified report from the intelligence community about the origins of COVID, but the results were inconclusive. That's according to a story from the Washington Post, which cites two U.S. officials familiar with the matter. According to the Washington Post, the intelligence report could not determine if the virus was passed from animals to humans or if it escaped from a lab in China. NBC News has not confirmed the report. U.S. officials say the lack of information from China about the initial outbreak in Wuhan complicated the investigation. The Washington Post says portions of the intelligence report could be declassified and made public soon. This all comes as the U.S. continues to battle the rampant spread of the Delta variant. Florida alone has now topped 3 million COVID cases since the pandemic began, with unvaccinated patients maxing out ICU beds across the state. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez is outside a Tampa hospital where nurses are feeling the emotional toll of COVID.
Joe and Savannah, good morning. The CDC is now reporting that week over week, new COVID cases are up 12% and deaths are up 23%. And now the state of Florida has topped 3 million COVID cases since the pandemic began.
At St. Joseph's Hospital in Tampa, the pandemic is peaking daily.
This is not normal.
Nurse Jamie Lillo says just yesterday she brought 4 patients to the morgue.
I went home last night and I was mad, for sure. Because I don't need to be doing this right now. We could have avoided this whole wave if more people in our country had gone and just gotten 2 shots.
The Baycare Health System now has about 1,200 COVID patients, shattering its previous record of 700 last summer.
This is one of the COVID ICUs. There's 26 beds here, and right now 25 of them are full. The hospital has set up overflow beds in other parts of the facility.
The amount of death and dying that we're seeing is, in my whole nursing career, I've never seen anything like it.
Ambulances often have to wait here to drop off patients, or they're rerouted to other hospitals that are also stretched thin.
For example, if we're on critical care bypass, we're saying that we don't have beds or staff to provide care for critical care patients.
So now, essentially, you're diverting ambulances about half the time now because you just don't have the beds.
Exactly.
Across the country, new COVID cases are up about 12% over the previous week. Hospitalizations stayed about the same, but deaths are up 23%.
I think the only chance we have is vaccination, and that's it.
Among healthcare workers, the emotional toll is measured in long shifts and longer memories. Just this week, Jamie Lillo helped care for a fellow nurse who came down with COVID and did not survive.
It could be me. It could be any nurse. It could be anyone we know. And once you're in the bed in the ICU, you don't have any control anymore. I'm still here and I'm still trying, but I want to make people better. That's what I do, and I can't, and it's awful.
Joe and Savannah, a few months ago, I, along with many healthcare workers that we spoke with, would have doubted that it would have gotten this bad again. But here at this hospital, it's the worst it's ever been. Still, of course, across the country, it's not this bad everywhere. But for many healthcare workers here and in other places experiencing surges, this is incredibly frustrating. Joe and Savannah.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, thank you.
Now, while the country sees a spike in cases among the unvaccinated, some states are ramping up their fight against masks. Iowa is one of 8 states that banned mask mandates in schools. And while President Biden said he could pursue legal action against those states, Iowa's governor is doubling down. In a statement to NBC News, a spokesperson claimed that masks can have negative impacts and said in part, quote, "Parents know the health of their children best, which is why the governor supports parental choice over mandates." NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett joins us from Des Moines, Iowa. Maura, good morning. So students I know have just headed back to school there this week. What are the COVID cases like there, and what has the return to the classroom looked like, knowing that there's not a mask mandate?
Good morning, Savannah. Well, here in Des Moines, it's going to be a rainy first day back at school. But across the state, the COVID case rates that we've seen are coming back at levels that we haven't seen since the winter. And actually, 13% of those new cases are among children under 17 years old. So a bulk of those that cannot be vaccinated. And so here in the state of Iowa, thousands of kids going back to school this week. One district in western Iowa already had to delay their first day of school because of a COVID outbreak here in Des Moines. The administration building was closed last week because 10% of staffers tested positive, so they're working remotely as kids go back. And so the Iowa State Education Association has warned districts across the state that they're going to need to start having those conversations about when they might close schools if COVID cases get worse across the state, Savannah.
And so what are school officials telling you about this mask debate?
It's a really tricky time to be an educator in states like Iowa right now. I spoke with the superintendent here in Des Moines, and he says that he just doesn't have the tools available to him to help keep his students safe. They can't enforce masks in school. A lot of their students, like the ones here at this elementary school, cannot be vaccinated. They don't even have a metric system within the school system to know about contact tracing or the numbers of kids that are being reported sick if they're getting COVID and what the level of the outbreak is there. And so he's really frustrated. I wanted to hear some of my conversation with the superintendent here.
Public health has been politicized. The COVID pandemic, I think, has been politicized. And it does feel like the arguments are less about what does science tell us is best practice in terms of keeping our communities safe, and more about winning political victories.
Do you feel like the state has made your job harder?
Yes.
How does that feel?
It feels it's frustrating. Feels very isolating, and I'm conflicted on a daily basis.
Now, some parents in the Des Moines area are asking the superintendent to push back against the state, like we saw in Texas and Florida, and get creative with how they're enforcing masks. But the reality is here, Dr. Ahart, just last academic year, did push back against the state when it came to virtual schools. Ultimately, the state pushed back against him. He had to go to a hearing and ultimately lost points off of his educator's license. And so that puts him in a very tricky position. And that's why they're pushing recommendations around masks, pushing teachers wearing masks to encourage their students to do the right thing. But unfortunately, his hands are tied, Savannah.
All right, Maura Barrett, thank you so much. And thanks for being out there in the rain for us.
Let's bring in Dr. Bob Lahita. He's a professor at the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine and the director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health. Dr. Lahita, always good to have you with us. I first want to get your reaction to that news that's breaking this morning from J&J on their booster shots. What are we learning from this information that J&J has put out there? And based on that, what would you tell patients who initially got that vaccine?
I would certainly, Joe. Well, first of all, good morning, Joe. I would certainly tell patients to get out there and get a booster shot if they are immunosuppressed. This is the first thing, the first group of people, the elderly, the immunosuppressed, and those with severe comorbidities, because those are the ones that are going to die first when they get the COVID infection, even if they've been vaccinated, because this virus, this COVID Delta variant is very, very transmissible and very, very severe, as you've seen from your reports. So I think it's a great thing. Now we have the Pfizer booster, we have the Moderna booster, which is in the works, and now we have the J&J booster. So all three vaccines approved in the U.S. now have booster shots.
That is good news to hear. I want to return to Iowa, where Maura is reporting from, and to an argument we heard from the governor there. Her office said in part that, quote, long-term mask use can come with its own cost. Experts have raised concerns about the potential negative impact to students' social, behavioral, and speech development. So break down that argument for us. Is it right? Does it make any sense? Or would you push back against that argument from the governor there?
I would have to push back against that argument. It seems that the governor, from the reports that I've read, stating that the data confirming the use of masks, et cetera, are inconclusive. They are based in data from India. These are all the statements that have come out of the State House in Iowa. And I just think it's so dangerous now that, you know, this very volatile population of children below the age of 12 who cannot get vaccinated at this time are at significant risk. And the numbers of children that are dying from this virus are increasing by the day. So this is a very serious matter. And I think speech development and all can wait for the moment. I think we have to deal with the consequences of the ongoing infection, which can be quite lethal in schools. And there seems to be no guidance there with regard to wearing masks, not wearing masks. Parents certainly cannot make the decision at all times because they're not terribly informed. So it really behooves the leadership of a state to take charge and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to work, at least for a few months, to prevent the tremendous effects of the pandemic on young people in particular.
Let's pivot from states banning mask mandates to those areas that are mandating that we have vaccines. Philadelphia's Board of Education approved a vaccine mandate for all school employees. New York's governor, the new governor there, called for a mask or test requirement for all schools. Do you hope to see more of these orders, especially now that Pfizer has been given full approval?
Yes, I think Pfizer's approval with the FDA has opened the floodgate. I think mandates should be put into place for public health measures, especially, and I've said this all along, Joe, school teachers, ancillary help should be vaccinated so the transmission of the virus among young people in particular is totally thwarted.
All right.
And I think New York and Philadelphia have got the right idea.
All right. Dr. Bablahita, as always, thank you so much for helping us break down all this breaking news this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Now to new developments overnight in Afghanistan, where Western forces have just days to complete their evacuation efforts and leave the country, likely abandoning thousands of Afghans.
That's after President Biden resisted international pressure to extend the August 31st deadline at yesterday's virtual G7 meeting.
We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. In addition, I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable, should that become necessary.
Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Jeff Bennett and foreign correspondent Matt Bradley, who is in Ramstein, Germany. Jeff, let's start with you. Yesterday, G7 leaders tried to push the president to delay that deadline. Why did he refuse? And can the U.S. finish evacuations there by the end of the month?
Well, to the second part of your question, Joe, the White House and the Pentagon have said repeatedly they do believe that they can evacuate all remaining Americans from Afghanistan by President Biden's self-imposed August 31st deadline. But you're right. Yesterday, he made clear that he intends to stick by that deadline. He also said that he has requested contingency plans from the Pentagon and from the State Department if events on the ground mean that that timeline needs to shift a bit more. But as Savannah pointed out, it does appear now that there won't be enough time time to evacuate all of the Afghan allies and all of those Afghans at risk, which brings with it another set of issues and contingencies. But President Biden was clear yesterday. In his view, the longer the U.S. remains on the ground there in Afghanistan, there are greater risks. Here's a bit more of what he had to say.
Every day we're on the ground is another day we know that ISIS-K is seeking to target the airport and attack both U.S. and allied forces and innocent civilians. Additionally, thus far, the Taliban have been taking steps to work with us so we can get our people out. But it's a tenuous situation.
And the White House maintains that the pace of evacuations is picking up. We just got some new numbers. They say in the last 24 hours, some 19,000 people have been airlifted out of that country. And then since August 14th, which is the day that those airlifts started, more than 80,000 people have been evacuated, Joe and Savannah.
All right, good to have those new numbers there, Jeff. So, Matt, this decision by the president could mean that thousands of Afghans hoping to flee the country will still miss out. You visited Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where many refugees are being flown to. What is the mood like over there? What was the reaction after this latest announcement?
Well, good morning, Joe and Savannah. Actually, Ramstein Air Base is behind me. It's a huge base, and we actually just saw a military transport plane land there. We don't know where they're from or if it even was filled with Afghan evacuees, but we were there yesterday. There are 7,500 Afghan evacuees now housed at this massive base. It's one of the largest in the world. 2,500 of them have already been processed and have been sent on to the States. But to say that this is a massive effort is an understatement. And actually, amidst all of the negative press that this has been getting, we spoke with some of the military personnel on this base, and they described the huge effort that went into this and how this effort has really increased their belief in their mission. Here's one of the head physicians at the base. His name is Simon Ritchie. He's a lieutenant colonel. Here's what he told me.
It's one of the proudest moments on active duty for me. There's no doubt about it. I've done what I consider some interesting, good work in the past. Very proud of that service, but this stands out, will always stand out to me because of the outsized impact it's going to have. We're seeing thousands and thousands of refugees come through, and to be able to provide some form of comfort to them to make their journey a little bit easier, it's incredibly meaningful.
So we also heard that there was a tent city that was built here in just a matter of 2 days, involving not just uniformed military members, but actually volunteers, their spouses, their children, all of them pitching in to build 323 tents in really just a matter of days. And that is what has set the stage for this huge effort. The main constraint here is not logistical, though. It's bureaucratic. But as you've seen, just as efforts to get people out of Kabul and get people onward from Doha to Al Udeid have picked up, they've picked up here, and in the last couple of days, we've seen more and more flights leaving as opposed to just arriving here. Joe, Savannah?
All right, Matt, Jeff, thank you so much for your reporting. Appreciate it.
Thousands of desperate people remain gathered at Kabul airport as the frantic evacuation effort continues ahead of next week's looming deadline. Sky News chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey is there and filed this report.
It's as bad as it gets now. Thousands upon thousands trapped. Behind them, the Taliban. In front, soldiers having to decide who stays and who goes. Nobody planned this. It's just how it is. The hours are counting down, and they know it. There are no good options left to them. Stick this out, try to get the family through and onto a flight, but risk failure, or go home and await whatever may happen at the hands of their new masters. And hope it's not fatal. This is absolutely awful. Such is the desperation to be heard by the soldiers, the would-be evacuees are standing up to their knees in a sewage-filled canal. The stench is indescribable. Some have been here for days. Remember, the heat, the lack of water, the lack of food and the conditions they're in are a cocktail just as lethal as any bullet. When they can identify people with the right papers to travel, they're pulled from the canal. It's a deep and sheer wall, the soldiers and the strongest stooping down to grab their families, often huge extended families, and out of the water. They emerge dripping wet but relieved. That nightmare is over. It still, however, doesn't mean it's about to get any easier. This is just the point where their right to travel will be considered. They can still be rejected. The numbers of tiny children enduring all this is heartbreaking. It must be so scary. It's noisy here. There are gunshots and shouting the whole time. What does this little boy think? Sat in his father's arms, protected from the sun by an umbrella, an occasional stroke to comfort him. That's all his dad can do, really, just comfort him.
Well, there's a real sense now that people are beginning to expect that this whole airlift is coming to an end, and they're really desperate. I mean, they're in a sewage canal. They're trying to show their paperwork, trying to show that they perhaps should be looked at. It's really desperate. That is actually the sort of pretty much hopeless column, we're told, but I can see all sorts of passports from different countries. The fact is that when the withdrawal happens, it's always going to be difficult because they can't keep working. The soldiers can't keep working up until the last minute. They have to start withdrawing in the days leading up to their departure. How they're going to deal with these people when that happens, we just don't know.
The Taliban are relieving the pressure on the process because they're stopping people coming now. Those aren't foreign special forces. That's the Taliban special forces, more heavily armed than others, and now slowly taking control of the Paras processing point. Beyond the British lines, they direct the human traffic from above. There's no choice for the soldiers. This is the only way things can get done. And the soldiers are absolutely exhausted. Inside the walls of the compound, they grab a few hours rest. They aren't working shifts. These boys have done 2 days and nights in a row. They're absolutely wiped out. They'll be back on the barricades in a few minutes. They will never forget this strange, unexpected tour of duty.
A lot has happened in a short period of time, but people have sort of risen to the challenge, accepted what's been put in front of them, and we really focused on the importance of recovering the entitled personnel, doing their mission, and doing it for a good cause.
And of course, your soldiers are very young, a lot of them, right? This is not something they're probably ever expected to do.
No, I think that's a fair comment for many people at any age. Not many of them have seen scenes such as this. But again, driven by that real sense of purpose, they've actually absolutely been committed to the task, and we'll see it through to the end.
And so this process goes on. It matters what is discussed and agreed thousands of miles away. But until someone says it's over, they'll keep trying and keep hoping. And that's all they have left. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Kabul.
Time to get a check on your morning News Now weather.
Bill Cairns is here. Hey, Bill.
Hey, good morning, guys. So we got two things to talk about. One, the heat, which we talk about all summer long, and the pesky tropics. Looks like it could be an issue again in about 5-6 days from now. So let's first get into the heat numbers. This is the immediate impact. 60 million people under heat advisories right now. We go all the way from the deep south up through the middle of the country into the Great Lakes. Even areas from Buffalo to Syracuse and even the New York City area is now under heat advisory. So it was very hot and humid in the deep south yesterday, and that is now all the way northwards into Cincinnati. Even Chicago is going to feel pretty uncomfortable near 100 today. D.C. will feel like 100 degrees. You get the picture. Pretty much the same as yesterday, but spreading a little more into the northeast. On tomorrow, we'll call it 102 in Richmond. It'll feel like Little Rock 100, St. Louis 104. Once again, you get the idea. This weekend, a few lucky people will begin to cool off a little bit. Not so much from in Detroit, but look at Syracuse, Portland, even New York City cools off. So at least the northeast will get a little bit of a break. Not so much for areas of the mid-Atlantic. And then the tropics. We have a tropical disturbance we're watching, a 70% chance of development. This one's going to head up towards Cancun by the time we get to like Friday night into Saturday. And then after that, guys, both of our long-range computer models take this system towards either Louisiana or Texas. So we'll watch that. That's not until Monday of next week, but that's not what we wanted to deal with already right after our last storm.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. See you in a bit.
Okay, good.
Coming up, House Democrats paving the way for President Biden's agenda.
But passing a $3.5 trillion budget plan wasn't easy. How the deal was reached, ending a standoff on Capitol Hill, up next. Gridlock in Congress threatened one of President Biden's major policy agendas, infrastructure. But just yesterday, the stalemate was broken. Speaker Pelosi wrangled her caucus, unanimously passing a procedural measure on two major policy goals. The first sets the stage to get infrastructure legislation to the White House, and the second puts a party line budget moving through Congress. Nothing is set in stone, of course, but this is a major step to getting these passed into law. Let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Hake for more on that and quite a few other developments actually from yesterday. Garrett, good morning. So we haven't been sure what would happen here on infrastructure, especially because there were 9 conservative Democrats who were threatening to derail this. So how did Speaker Pelosi get 100% of her caucus to vote yes on this big infrastructure bill?
Well, this is what Speaker Pelosi is particularly good at, and she was able to forge a consensus here with those more moderate conservative Democrats and the rest of the party to agree to have a date certain for a vote on the hard infrastructure bill that had already passed the Senate. That's September 27th, in exchange for their votes to move forward on this budget reconciliation process. So the budget bill passes, the rule sets up for this debate and this vote on hard infrastructure. But really, Pelosi traded an August problem for a September problem, because if this big reconciliation bill, that $3.5 trillion bill that includes so many other Democratic priorities, isn't ready to go yet by the 27th, it's not clear that the other end of her caucus, the left flank, the progressives, will be willing to vote on the infrastructure bill absent that bigger bill. So she kind of lives to fight another day, moves the ball forward on both these bills, pick your metaphor, but at the end of September is going to be messy.
And Garrett, some other big news from yesterday. 2 House members actually went to Afghanistan. That's, of course, where thousands of U.S. troops are evacuating tens of thousands of people, as we just saw moments ago. How is this trip landing with House leadership and even the White House, and what did those members say?
Yeah, but this is Democrat Seth Moulton, Republican Peter Meyer. Both are veterans. Moulton of the war, I believe, in Afghanistan, Meyer of the war in Iraq. They said they wanted to go in and conduct on-the-ground oversight of the operation in Kabul. They took private flights, charter flights in and out. Their colleagues are displeased, to put it mildly. Speaker Pelosi put out a letter reminding members not to travel to Afghanistan right now, saying, we understand that people want to go. You're just going to get in the way. We've also heard pushback from other members from both parties and from the White House saying, look, we appreciate the thought here, but this is an active evacuation. It's a massive military airlift. Anybody going in, including members of Congress with some military experience, you're just going to get in the way. Knock it off.
All right. And Garrett, finally, Democrats also banded together yesterday to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So now it heads to the Senate, but that's where another voting rights bill is collecting dust. So what will the fight look like to get either of those to President Biden's desk?
Now, this is a big moral victory for Democrats to pass this bill, of course, named after John Lewis, the civil rights icon. But unfortunately for them, it may be just a moral victory, because the path ahead in the Senate for this bill looks pretty much like the path in the Senate for that other bill. It is almost impossible to imagine 10 Republicans coming together to pass any kind of national voting rights bill, or really any bill at all that touches voting at the federal level at this time. They're just not interested in doing it. And so absent a rule change, absent a change to that 60-vote threshold, this bill, too, will likely sit in the Senate. Now, Leader Schumer has said they're going to have votes on these voting rights issues when they come back in September. But for now, unless the rules change, and it doesn't look like they will, those votes will likely fail.
All right. Garrett Hake, lots to cover this morning. Thank you.
Members of the U.S. intelligence community are, quote, furious and disgusted by the prospect of abandoning thousands of Afghan allies as President Biden sticks to the August 31st evacuation deadline. That's according to a former U.S. intelligence official who declined to be named. NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now with more on our team's reporting on all this. Julia, some strong words there, but that person is just one of many speaking out, criticizing the situation in Afghanistan. What have you been hearing?
That's right. We're hearing from people both in Congress and different agencies throughout the Biden administration, as well as the intelligence community, who are really very upset about the evacuation and the fact that President Biden will be sticking with this August 31st deadline. And when they look at that deadline, they see that there's no way to possibly evacuate all of the Afghan allies who worked with the American troops during the 20-year effort there. And so it's clear that there will be people left behind. And many of those people are in touch with people on the ground, trying to get them to safety, and to no avail. Many of these gates at the airport are still shut down, and they're worried about their safety. We heard from Senator Ben Sasse yesterday, who said, damn the deadline. The U.S. should honor its commitments. And we've also spoken to people at the Department of Homeland Security who have started some finger pointing, some pointing at State Department, saying that this process should have begun much earlier when the United States committed to this August 31st deadline.
So we understand the U.S. tried to extend that deadline by 4 days when CIA Director William Burns met with the de facto Taliban leader yesterday. Do we know why that proposal was rejected? Could the U.S. have pushed harder?
Well, it seems at this point the Taliban is calling the shots on that deadline, and they said that that's something that they were going to stick firmly to. Now, President Biden did say that there's a contingency plan, and that if the Taliban doesn't let people through to the airport, they could push back that date. But of course, it's really up to now, the people on the ground to try to work to that August 31st deadline. And something I will say is that that doesn't necessarily mean that on August 31st, we're going to see tens of thousands of people flown out. The United States has to start basically ratcheting down its presence there even before next week. So we could see evacuations start to dwindle out at the end of this week or over the weekend, because then they have to try to blow up the equipment that is still on the ground. My colleague Courtney Kuby has spoken to people she covers at the Pentagon who says they will prioritize lives over equipment, but there is some sort of ratcheting down of this effort in order to meet that deadline.
And that deadline's coming quick. Now, Julia, anger has also been aimed at the State Department over its handling of visa applications. What more can you tell us about that?
That's right. There seems to be this back and forth going on right now when you have the Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, and Department of Defense all trying to vet what we call these special interest visa applications. These belong to people who were Afghan allies who may have helped with some of the interpreting during the U.S. war effort and other efforts that they did there. Now we're hearing from people within the Department of Homeland Security saying that the State Department should have started earlier. We're seeing a lot of frustration about the two systems, the databases talking to each other. If you have information from one, say the Department of Defense, can you vet this person in the State Department or Customs and Border Protection database? They're having trouble with that. And we understand that in Doha, one of those third country sites where these evacuees are being taken, where they can be vetted before they go to the United States, there's a lot of frustration there. And it's led to some very slow vetting processes and some very unsafe and unsanitary conditions for the Afghan evacuees there, all because of these interagency problems. Either the systems are not compatible or the officials simply aren't able to figure out how to get this ready to go in such a short timeline.
Yep, all that, and the clock is ticking. Julia, thanks for your reporting as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Let's take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
Ali Arouzi joins us now from Tehran. Good morning, Ali.
Good morning, guys. Well, some countries are seeing an alarming spike in COVID-19 infections and deaths. South Korea has reported 2,155 coronavirus cases, nearly matching a daily record increase earlier this month. And here in Iran, 709 coronavirus deaths have been recorded in the past 24 hours. That's the highest number of fatalities since the beginning of the outbreak. Greece has joined the list of countries that will place restrictions on the unvaccinated. The country's health minister announced plans to impose new testing requirements and attendance restrictions on people who haven't been vaccinated against COVID-19. The measures include weekly or twice-weekly tests for the unvaccinated and restrictions on people entering indoor venues who haven't been vaccinated. And a 97-year-old U.S. World War II veteran had an emotional reunion with 3 children he saved in Italy who are now octogenarians themselves. Martin Adler had never seen the children since the war, but always treasured a black and white photo of himself as a young soldier with the 3 children he saved. During the lockdown, his daughter used social media to track them down, and after all these years, the veteran and the 3 siblings met in Italy on Monday.
Very good. Some good social media news there. I like to see that. All right. Thank you, Allie. We've got much more coming up next.
Yeah, Morning News Now is back right after this. Welcome back. Rapper Kanye West filed court documents Tuesday to legally change his name. He wants to change it to Ye, just Ye with no middle or last name. A judge must approve the change before it becomes official. Documents cite personal reasons for the change. Ye is Kanye West's longtime 2-letter nickname, and he's gone by that on his social media pages for years. He also released a 2018 album that was titled Ye. In addition to Ye being a shortening of his first name, Kanye has said he likes that Ye is a word used throughout the Bible. It's spelled Y-E, so we were wondering if it's Ye or Ye, but we heard Ye.
I honestly,
Because I know that's what people call him.
We'll go with that. It's just interesting that he needs to legally change it. Like, my full name is Joseph, but people call me Joe. I didn't legally change it.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, with the last name, it's the last name of his kids and everything, you know, but interesting.
You know, good for him.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Savannah.
All right, now it's time for our weekly checkup, the big health headlines you might have missed, and we've got a strong lineup of things you should know today.
Yes, NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joins us now. Good morning, Dr. Azar. Good to have you with us. So let's start. Our first study covers some alarming research showing an increase in diabetes among younger people. Type 1 diabetes surging across the white and black populations, while type 2 diabetes skyrocketed in black and Hispanic populations. What more can you tell us about this?
Right. Well, first, you know, whenever you hear a study like this, you always ask yourself, why is this important? And I think the biggest answer is that diabetes happens to be the 7th leading cause of death in the U.S. So this was an NIH-sponsored study, and they basically looked at incidence rates of type 1 and type 2 diabetes between the years of 2001 and 2017. And as you mentioned, they saw a 45% increase in type 1 diabetes and 95% increase in type 2 diabetes. And why is this important? Well, guess what? 3/4 of the U.S. population is either overweight or obese, and those are significant risk factors for the development, especially of type 2 diabetes. So the United States Preventive Services Task Force has changed their recommendation now that if you are overweight or obese, you start screening for diabetes or prediabetes at the age of 35 instead of 40. Doctor's orders, I always like to tell people, know the signs and symptoms of diabetes. That could include increased thirst, hunger, urination. But one of the most important things, I think the take home here is that especially if you're pre-diabetic, that means your sugars are rising, but you're not quite qualified as diabetic yet. If you increase your exercise, you watch your carbs, you can really make a difference and actually prevent the development of bona fide diabetes, Joe.
Great tips there, Dr. Azar, as always. Now let's move on to our next study. So drinking enough water throughout your life could reduce the risk of developing heart failure, we're hearing. So for those of us, I have one of those big water bottles that tells you like 9 a.m. and 12 p.m., like 4 p.m. You're almost there. It's kind of funny. But are we on to something?
So this is interesting. And again, for this, I said to myself, why in the world would the concentration of sodium in your blood have anything to do with heart failure? Well, it happens to be that if you drink less water, the concentration of sodium in your blood is actually going to increase. And that can lead to changes in the biggest pumping muscle in the heart called the left ventricle. It can thicken the left ventricle, and that can actually increase the risk of heart failure. So in this study, they actually determined that higher sodium concentrations in middle age can actually increase the risk of heart failure 25 years later. So then we have to ask ourselves, well, how much fluid should we be actually taking in? Look at this variability, though. For women, it's 54 to 71 fluid ounces, and for men, it's 68 to 101 fluid ounces. So it's not those, 8 glasses of 8 ounces for everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It depends a lot on your physical activity, where you live, how much you sweat, all of those things. So doctor's orders for me, well, the obvious take home, Savannah, kudos to your big, jug of water. Definitely carry your water around all day. Drinking a lot of water is definitely good for you. And if you don't like plain water, try sparkling, sugar-free, something that's flavored. You can also eat a lot of fruit that contains a lot of water. For example, watermelon is a good example. You can get your fluids that way as well.
Yay for sparkling water. All right, quickly on this last one here. Service dogs are helping veterans with their mental health. Bipartisan legislation has passed both the House and Senate, what's known as the Puppies Assisting Wounded Service Members, or PAWS, for Veterans Therapy Act. Now these dogs are much more than a companion for these vets. How are they different?
So I was lucky enough to have done a Today Show segment a couple of years ago where I actually met these vets and I met their service dogs. And it was completely enlightening to me. And let me just give you this stat. From 2005 to 2018, 90,000 vets died by suicide. So I cannot even impress to you how important this bill is. It costs about $25,000 to train a service dog for wounded vets with PTSD. They are kind of like emotional support dogs, but they're even more than that when you find out what these dogs can do for these vets. This was a passed bipartisan bill. It's on the desk of the president. There's no expectation that he is not going to sign it. We all know that President Biden is definitely an animal and a dog lover. My take home for folks is this. If you are a veteran, please contact the VA to see if you are eligible for this. And also, just as a take home to families and friends, vets do suffer from PTSD, especially those who are withdrawing from Afghanistan now. Give your loved ones time, but this is something that can really make a difference in their lives.
Dr. Azar, as always, great advice, and what a good last story to end on there.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. See you soon.
Coming up, a leap of a lifetime. A World War II vet jumps out of a plane at 100 years old.
We'll tell you why it's a jump to remember in more ways than one. Next on Morning News Now.
Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Bertha Coombs is with us this morning. Hey, Bertha.
Hey, good morning, guys. You know, we're getting some news this morning from Johnson & Johnson. Their preliminary data shows that people who've gotten their shot will probably benefit from a booster starting at 6 months out. That data will continue to be studied. Meantime, Goldman Sachs has told employees anyone entering its U.S. offices, including clients, must be fully vaccinated, according to an internal memo. The bank will also be requiring masks worn in offices regardless of vaccination status, and fully vaccinated employees will also have to take a weekly COVID test starting next month. Goldman's new policy is in line with Wall Street rivals Citigroup and Morgan Stanley. Meantime, TikTok and Shopify are rolling out a new shopping tab in the video sharing app that businesses can use to add to their profile with a link to their online stores. The tab will be available to Shopify merchants with a TikTok business account. In addition to the tab, TikTok and Shopify are launching product links in the app, allowing merchants to tag items in a normal TikTok post. And Krispy Kreme's free vaccine donut deal just got sweeter. All next week as part of a Show Your Heart campaign. The chain will give out 2 free donuts to anyone who has a vaccination card showing that they've received at least 1 shot. They'll go back to normal after Labor Day. The original offer, just 1 free glazed donut. You know, you've got to do that for back to school. Got to get back in shape. But still, pretty sweet deal to end the summer.
I know. Yeah, I like that. They sweetened the deal. See what you did there.
Thank you, Bertha.
A 100-year-old San Diego veteran has taken the jump of a lifetime to remember those who served at D-Day. For our NBC News series Inspiring America, nightly news anchor Lester Holt has the story of Tom Rice and his memorial to his fallen brothers in World War II.
Joe and Savannah, some inspiration this morning from a veteran we have come to know well and who just celebrated a birthday milestone in high style. For Tom Rice, the feeling before parachuting 7,500 feet above the earth is a familiar one, and one he welcomed again to celebrate his 100th birthday.
I like to jump. It gives you a new vision of so many things that 90% of the people will never be able to see.
This jump, though, far different than the one he took in 1944 over the Normandy countryside in German-occupied France in a prelude to the D-Day invasion. A few years ago, he recreated that jump, returning to France to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the invasion, where I was lucky enough to meet some of the heroes of that war, with the full knowledge their ranks grow thinner by the year.
I feel great. Yeah. Go back up and do it again.
And jump again he did.
We're honoring all of those that were killed, that didn't make it, that couldn't get home.
Rice landing to cheers from his hometown of Coronado. A birthday celebration, saluting the greatest generation and 100 years of a life well lived.
Sir, congratulations, happy birthday. It's recognition for somebody who helped shape, this world as we know it now.
Happy birthday, Tom. We love you.
Rice says he hopes to jump again when he's 101. In the meantime, he offers this advice.
There's a lot to be done and a lot to live. It doesn't make any difference what age you are, but do it. End of paragraph.
Very
Well, that
cool.
was amazing.
Yeah.
Again, when he's 101.
Yeah, I know. I just want to do it. I don't know if I do it now.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, we'll see. All right, coming up, he was known as the backbone of the Rolling Stones.
This morning, the music world mourning the death of drummer Charlie Watts. A look back at his life and the tributes pouring in. You're watching Morning News Now.
Rock and roll has lost a legend. Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts died yesterday. He was 80 years old. Watts began his life as the son of a truck driver in a time when Hitler's bombs rained down on England. Then the drummer spent more than half a century holding down one of the greatest rock bands of all time. Today Show's Carson Daly reports on the music world coming together to remember an icon.
Tributes pouring in this morning for Rolling Stones drumming legend Charlie Watts. For more than 50 years, Watts was there alongside Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood, drumming his way into rock history. Through thousands of sold-out stadium shows and more than 25 albums and decades of hits, like Sympathy for the Devil,
Pleased to meet you. Hope you guess my name.
Gimme Shelter, and Satisfaction. Watts was always there keeping time for the Stones and doing it with style. He didn't always embrace the rock star lifestyle, but his love for music was unstoppable. Watts telling Today in 2012.
I just love playing in a band. I love playing the drums.
One of the band's last public performances with Watts, playing You Can't Always Get What You Want from Quarantine.
But if you try sometime, yeah, you might find you get what you need.
Offstage, Watts was a family man. He married his wife Shirley in 1964 during the early days of the Stones, and they had one daughter together. Charlie Watts' other longtime love was jazz. And in the 80s, he formed a jazz band and released several albums with the Charlie Watts Quintet. Elton John tweeting, Charlie Watts was the ultimate drummer and such brilliant company. Ringo Starr writing, we're going to miss you, man. And Paul McCartney posting this emotional video tribute.
Charlie was a rock and a fantastic drummer. Love you, Charlie. I always loved you.
While Watts was never one for the spotlight,
If you have any questions, Charlie will answer many of them.
he never lost sight of the enduring impact the Rolling Stones had on their fans and the music industry.
What's really surprising is we've stayed together, with all egos and lack of it and too much and whatever it is that make people what they are, and that people actually like you still. It's staggering, really.
People definitely still like him.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a cool piece there to remember him.
All right, that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.